Hi, and welcome to another edition of Let's Talk About. And today I'm really excited to have a brilliant guest on the podcast now, Josh Tomeoni, who's going to help us talk about men challenges. And we're going to dig into that with the derelict. Welcome to the podcast, Josh.
Thanks, John. Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it. Really
Awesome.
excited for this.
Yeah, so let's and we met through Dan Martell's Elite Coaching Group, which is a support network, growth network for business, and lots of tough love that comes from Dan, which I find awesome. And you're a recent joiner to that as well, and that's a natural parallel to your group as well, the derelict. So tell me more about the derelict and how it helps men, especially.
Sure. I appreciate you asking about it. So I started the Derelict about a year ago now at the end of 2023. And the idea behind it was, honestly, I had one of those moments in my life where I was 39 years old at the time and I was about to turn 40. And my question to myself was not, what's your mission and passion in life when you're 40? It's what is it when you're 50? And when I sat with that
Okay.
question, yeah, and I sat with that question. I thought, why have I been called here? And I really believe it's to be able to help men with a lot of what's really difficult in today's society. So we live in a
Mm,
society where, by and large, masculinity is tended to look at as negative, I would say. The terms like toxic masculinity and chauvinistic and evil and like just masculinity itself is bad. And I firmly don't believe that. I believe true masculinity is really healthy. And when matched
the
with
strength.
true feminine energy, then it works really well. And a lot of men are being told to basically get rid of that masculine energy to only be feminine. And it's not working in their life.
Mm,
We all have both energies, but it's just not working when they do that. So, this is kind of a long-winded answer to your question where I realize that my entire mission in life is to try to help men that are going through difficult things, that are going through struggles, that are going through failures, that have been through it. I've been through the ringer and pretty much everything, whether it's relationships, divorce, business failures, etc. And there's actually something that I've heard Dan say as well that we can point to in a second that I think is really good. And that is, I'm trying to be there for the guys that are in the time that was my darkest of days.
mm.
And I want to be there for the guys that are going through the stuff that I went through. And I didn't have a coach. I didn't have somebody that could support me going through all those different things.
Yeah.
So that's a long-winded way of saying that started the Derelict. It started the Derelict podcast. It started the Derelict coaching company. And that's where we are from there.
Cool. And what? How did you come up with the name, the derelict?
Yeah, good question. I should have started with that, right? So if you look up the word derelict in the dictionary, it means outcast or disparaged or thrown aside. It can also reference broken down oceanic vehicles, right? Ships, that
Mm,
sort of thing. It also can refer to kind of buildings that are in disrepair that aren't doing real well. So the whole idea is it's kind of this cast aside, disrepaired item. And that's exactly how I felt when I was going through my divorce.
mm,
Like, now all of a sudden I was just this outcast of society. And I think a lot of men are feeling that way right now because they're not really sure how to live their kind of authentic masculinity inside of them. And they're getting told all these different things. And I think a lot of us feel a little bit outcast or disparaged. So
mm.
that's why it's called derelict, because all are welcome. All the derelicts are welcome. But if you're not a derelict,
Right.
you're not welcome. So if you have all
Well,
your
and
stuff figured out, then I might not be the place for you.
yeah, well, and it's a good point because it does feel as though everyone has a element of derelict in their life. It's whether man, woman, or otherwise. It's to your point earlier around the masculinity versus femininity. At the end of the day, it's all around showing up, being compassionate, considerate, and adding value to other people. And then, but that's easy to say, but not easy to do. So to your point there, I love unpacking the mindset. It really is around what you see, what you interpret, how you who you talk to. Starts to, I think everyone goes through it messes with your mind. You compare, you feel you're not worthy, you feel like a derelict. So talk me through that journey in terms of what you've seen in terms of that progression from people who feel that that dereliction to then moving through to the recovery, and where you typically see the steps there?
Yeah, that's a good question, because what I don't want people to hear, it's the same idea. We talk about failure a lot on the podcast, and the
Mm,
reason we talk about failure a lot is because I think people really have a hard time dealing with it in the moment, because it
mm,
seems like everybody else has everything figured out, right? Go on social media, everyone's successful, everyone has everything
yeah.
figured out. So if I'm actually going through a struggle or failure, I don't necessarily want to share it. I would say, especially as a guy, guys are also not really encouraged to share those things.
Hmm.
So coming back to the definition of derelict, what that doesn't mean is, it doesn't mean that somebody's worthless, right? It doesn't mean that the entire self is disparaged or anything else. It's the same
Mm,
way I look at failure. Failure is not a bad thing. I The most growth I've ever had in my life is because I failed at something huge, and then I've learned from it after that.
yes. Yeah.
So I wear the derelict as a badge of honor, not as somebody of like, "Oh, that guy's gotta figure out his life." No, no, that guy has his life figured out, and he's okay with it. He's okay
Mm,
being a little outcast, a little set aside, a little on the outskirts, knowing that that's what, like you said, his morals, his vision, his mission for his life, and then he's just gonna move forward with that despite
mm.
anybody else. So that's how I see it. I see it coming from a position of power versus a position of weakness.
Yeah. And I love that reframing, because everyone goes through those journeys differently. I went through a journey with my wife. She had cancer twice and
Mm,
survived,
mm,
but it made me question how I show up, because am I being the best husband, partner, relationship that I can be to someone going through something I can never fully appreciate? When someone's going through breast cancer, that's something I can never fully
right.
appreciate. So and I haven't been through any cancer myself. So I haven't been through that. So to your point, I found myself questioning, okay, I know I'm being the best I can, but is it good enough?
Mm.
And did I fail? No. But could I have been better? Yes. And I loved your framing of failure around, okay, what have I learned from that? What's the reflection, or how am I stronger because of it? Is that a
Yeah,
fair way
yeah,
to view that?
yeah, it's great, and it was probably a few years ago now. I came to the realization that I'm never gonna have another regret ever again in my life,
Okay.
because
Love that.
regrets are completely worthless. They don't help anybody. They don't help me. They don't help anybody else, etc. What I'm not saying is, I'm not just gonna go on a spree of doing evil things
Yeah,
and
I was
just
gonna
say, "Oh, I
say.
have no regret." That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, I try to live my life, and this is why I love this derelict tribe, is that it's a tribe of men just trying to live our life as authentically and humanly as possible every single moment. And then as we move on to the next moment, I'm not going to regret the last one, because if that's what I'm trying to do, then hopefully I'm bringing the best decision into that exact thing. And
Mm,
for years and years and years of my life, I always I always had it planned, right? And you know what happens when you plan something, right? So it's always like, this was gonna happen, then this was gonna happen, and every single time it didn't happen. And it's not because of the fact that I'm not good at visioning and mission and goals and everything else, but it's always something outside your control, right? You don't
mm,
We never know what's actually gonna happen. Doesn't mean I didn't accomplish my goals. It just means that I'm not at the spot where I thought I would be. I'm over here instead of over here. Not better or worse, just different spot. And I think guys, especially, at least a lot of the guys that I coach, have a really hard time just being themselves within that journey,
yep.
right? Like, it's always, if you're anything like me, kind of this type A get stuff done personality, it's always about the destination, not the journey. I have to consistently remind myself that it's about the journey,
Me too. Yes. Yeah.
instead of, it's just, oh, I got to get here. I got to get here. And I think that's why a lot of guys have a hard time being in that, being in the failure, being in the struggle, being actually open to it and being honest about it, and even sharing it with someone, and even hiring somebody like me, a coach, or somebody like you, a coach, or somebody like
Mm,
our coach. Because I think that it's just difficult to get that vulnerable in the first place. Because I
mm,
think we're told a lot in society and everything else that we're not supposed to do that, for a man.
yep. And I see it with men, but also see it a lot of my businesses around the coaching, guidance, leadership around technology and business, specifically
Mm.
delivering a new software, balanced scorecard metrics. And the comparison there is a lot of people aren't exposing themselves to, okay, have we achieved the result, the success? And if it fails, they're saying, okay, there's no room for, especially in corporations. I see it more, but over the last, I'd say 20 years, when I was first starting out, my 20 or 30 years ago, starting out my career, there was a lot of, okay, don't expose yourself. Someone's going to get one up on you. You don't share your failures. I remember one manager right at the beginning saying, never talk about your failures because someone else might not see them or not spot them. So if you delivered something or create a project or technology or whatever, don't point out mistakes, because if they don't see them, then you're in the clear. And I was just thinking how that's just so much of a, because I want to get back to it. You're not taking accountability at the end of the day, and levels of accountability is something we can unpack, but there's no regrets because you're not taking accountability, but you need some regrets. I hear you in terms of no regrets, but you need to take accountability for what you're doing to say, okay, here's how I'm going to improve going forward. That was a bit of a winding path there, but you just spurned so many ideas there around owning up to things that haven't gone well and then making them right ultimately.
Yeah, and well, I think you just answered your own question.
Yeah, I probably
I
did.
think. I think because what you said was, it's owning your stuff, right?
Mm,
Making it right, and then not having any regrets. Those all
mm,
go together. It's not like I don't have any regrets because I've never done anything wrong, and therefore I'm never gonna try to make anything right that I did wrong. No, that's not what we're saying. Do that, right? Like,
yeah.
go make amends to people. Go, like, tell them what you did wrong. Own your stuff. Own how it made
Mm,
them feel. I'm all about all of that. I do that all the time. But then don't live with any regrets, because what a lot of people do at that point is that even if they've taken all those steps, which most people won't take those steps in the first place, they'll think they don't need to. They'll convince
mm,
themselves, well, I didn't do anything wrong. I don't need to take a step. That person did it, right? That whole victim mentality thing. But even if they can admit all that and they do all that, a lot of people will still live with, this aching, this shame, this regret, this something that, like, "Oh, if I woulda just done it differently." And
mm,
that's what I mean by that doesn't help anybody,
right.
because it doesn't help heal the person that was wronged. It doesn't help heal the person that did the wronging. It just makes it worse. So they're probably gonna go out and wrong again if they feel
Mm,
that way.
yeah. So how would someone start that journey if they know they've, because I've been there. I've been in situations, personal situations where I know I need to either apologize or I need to um, right a wrong, but it was a mistake, honest mistake, but I need to fix something. And half my brain's going, well, if you just let it go, no one's going to know and you just move on. But I know it's on the flip side, I know it's the right thing to do and I have to do it. And they usually end up doing it, but that's usually an emotional wrestle in terms of,
Yeah.
so what have you seen of steps or ways to move through that journey?
Well, a very easy resource for anyone is any 12-step program has an amends
Hmm.
process because it's one of the steps. So originally pioneered, if I could use that word, by Alcoholics Anonymous, AA, and then
Mm,
there's basically an anonymous for everything.
mm.
Food, sex, eating, I don't know what else,
Drugs, yeah.
love,
Mm,
alcohol, drugs, a whole bunch of stuff. But
mm,
anyway, the reason I'm bringing them up is because, they're really clear about how to do an amends. And I think maybe to answer your question, what I'll do instead is just tell you the difference, the way I see it, between an amends and apology, because you mentioned both.
yes.
So to me, an apology, the reason I have a very difficult time with apologies is that they don't have to take any sort of ownership. Like, I
Okay.
could come to you and I could say, for whatever we're talking about, like, I'm sorry, but that's not actually taking ownership of what I did wrong,
Mm,
right? You see that?
Yeah,
Like,
because
maybe I'm
you're
just
just
sorry for how I
saying the
made you
word.
feel,
Yeah.
or maybe I'm just sorry because you're mad at me, or maybe I'm just sorry because you're sad, right? Like, it doesn't really take ownership for what I did wrong, versus if I came to you and I said, "The other day, I spoke to you out of turn. I used really terrible language, tone, etc. I definitely shouldn't have done that. That was very
Mm,
wrong." And I'm sure that that probably upset you. I'm sure that that probably made you feel really frustrated or angry. And I really shouldn't have done that. See the
mm.
difference?
Yep. Yeah, I love because yeah, you're taking accountability for what you did and how it might make them feel.
Those two things. That's exactly what
Mm,
an amends is. So
mm,
I grew up in a home, and then also in my marriage, I carried it into where I would apologize all the time, and I would say I'm
mm,
sorry all the time. So I'm the king of doing this wrong. So I'm not here saying I have this figured out, but here's what I learned. I used to say I'm sorry a lot, but that wasn't always for the best reasons. Sometimes
mm,
I usually was genuinely sorry that I did something, but I also just wanted it to feel better, and I just wanted them to feel better, right? And I realize now looking back on it, when I started taking ownership of stuff, it's completely different because if I can own that I did something wrong and then address how that probably made them feel,
mm.
that's much more healing than me just coming to you and saying I'm sorry, which is kind of white noise. I don't even let my kids tell me I'm sorry anymore.
Yeah, it becomes a throwaway term. It doesn't mean anything. It's and a couple of things I take away from what you just said there around the I'm sorry how it might make them feel. And then also I can't remember who told me this a few years ago as well. It's okay, and here's how I'm going to do it differently next time, or here's how I'm going to change what I did, which might be taking a beat before I say something, or in this situation, I'm going to ask more questions or something. You know what I mean? You're taking that learning into the amends as well. And then the other
Yeah,
point
and
there
I would
around
say
the
just on a side note of that, yeah, I agree with you. Or any sort of hope for the future for your relationship of whoever this person is. I would say the only caveat to that last one that you got to be careful of is it just depends on what the relationship is with the person you're doing this with.
okay,
You know what I
what do
mean?
you
So like,
talk, yeah,
well,
talk to me more about that.
yeah, I'll tell you an example. So if it's an ongoing relationship, right, your partner, your spouse, a good friend, etc., then of course you want to do that. You want to talk about
Mm,
the hope for the future, what you hope that your relationship looks like moving forward, etc. Where that can be dangerous is what if you need to go make an amends to somebody that you don't really want a relationship with moving forward,
mm,
like an ex-spouse or an ex-girlfriend or
right.
an ex-boyfriend or an ex-friend or an ex somebody that you feel that you've wronged, that you've never made right, you want to go make wrong. You believe that you can do so in a healthy way and it'll be healthy for them. That's another key. You don't want to hurt anybody doing this.
Mm,
And 12 step talks about this as well. So you just want to do it when it's a healthy way.
yeah.
But even if it's a healthy way with that person, it might not be healthy to put any sort of hope for the future, relationship, reconciliation, you know what I mean?
Right.
Because
Yes.
in that context, it can be confusing. Like I've done this
Right.
before where I've gone back to an ex-girlfriend or an ex-spouse and made amends to them. And you got to be really careful how you do that because you don't want to make it seem like you're just admitting wrongdoing to try to manipulate something in the relationship. Does that make sense?
It does because again, it's being courageous, bold, and strong to say this is the situation, and that there is no going forward here for in we're parting in good terms, or hopefully good terms, or it's there's no true amends for the future. But it's being specific enough to say, here's how we need to put closure to this. Is how I read that.
Yeah. Yeah, for
This is
sure.
this is a lot to unpack here. This
It
is
it is
like,
it is a lot. I usually dive pretty deep. Sorry. We
yeah,
don't
no, this
I
is
don't hang
good.
out on the surface very much. I spent a lot of years of my life hanging out on the surface, John. I'm not really interested anymore.
Well, and me too as well, because growing up as a British guy, a British guy. I mean, the whole British culture is very reserved, very
Right.
old back. It's you're in your place, you do your thing, and so a couple of bold moves that we took, me and my wife took, in terms of leaving the UK to emigrate to Canada. You know what I mean? It was we had to leave some relationships behind, and fortunately, the good relationships are still maintained. But some of our friends were, well, why are you doing that? It's going to be difficult, and this was an emotional journey for us to say, but it's a calling, a purpose, something we need to do for ourselves, especially after the first round of cancer that Beck, my wife, had suffered, and it's like life's too short. We need to do something different, and we had to move away from some relationships that were holding us back. It took us probably 3 years, 3 or 4 years to actually leave the country from when we first thought of the idea. And some of that 3, 4 years was because people were, "Are you sure? That why would you want to do this? Your home's here," type statements. And there was a big hard choice for us to say, no, we this is what we need to do. And I'm sorry you can't be part of our lives for this journey, but this is something we need to do and want to maintain the relationship. But if it can't happen, then sure, let's see where it goes. But this is a journey we're going to take.
And that's rough. I mean, I've been through those
Mm,
transitions in my life as well. Not the exact same, but just transitions where you have to leave some relationships aside, other relationships change, and that's always been difficult for me because I'm a pretty
mm.
faithful, loyal guy. I don't really like changing relationships. I just want to be friends with everybody forever, and
Yeah.
that's just not how life works. So I definitely relate to that. What were you saying before? There was something else I was gonna comment on before you said, oh, just about, actually, Dan Martell talked about this the other day, about how it's, most of your success is about the 5 people that influence you the most,
Mm.
and that goes back
Yep.
to the Harvard study that said it was the 5 people that you're around the most, and Martell was saying, he's like, "No, I actually think it's the people that influence you the most, or that you
Yes.
allow to influence yourself the most," which I thought was an interesting distinction. I wrote
Mm.
down my 5. 3 of them are close people that I know. 2 of them I've never met, which I also
Mm.
thought was interesting.
Yes.
But I guess where I was going with all of this is that when you want to make a change in your life, specifically what I've noticed, when it's a really big change, like you were talking about, for health reasons, making a huge move from
Mm.
England to Canada, that's a big deal.
Mm.
What I've found when I've been in those stages of my life, every single time I've had a big decision like that, is the time where it's inevitable that relationships will change. Because in general, as human nature, we like everything the same.
Yeah.
And when somebody in our close friend group, close family group, close something else does something that doesn't match with our pattern of them, sometimes it's really hard to continue to maintain relationship at that
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
That's what I found.
Yeah. And
And
yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, and so I work with a lot of guys going through difficult transitions in their life, like divorce. And divorce is a good example of this because if a guy's going through divorce and then he's changing, because you have to change during a divorce. It's
Mm.
impossible not to. Doesn't necessarily mean it better. It could get worse too, but you have to change during divorce. When that guy's going through that, he has a bunch of well-meaning friends. I'm sure all of yours were well-meaning people, right? That
Mm.
wanted you to
Yep.
stay in England. They didn't want any harm for you. That's not why they were saying that. But this divorce guy is going through this, and he has all these well-meaning friends that either haven't gone through it or went through it a long time ago or don't really have a lot and giving him advice the entire time,
Mm.
which is gonna be really problematic. He's probably gonna lose a bunch of money
Yeah.
that he doesn't need to. He's gonna lose time with his kids he doesn't need to. He's not gonna get as favorable terms as he gets to, right? All these sort of things if he just listened to the people that are well-meaning in their life. So I guess my whole point with that
Mm.
ramble, appreciate you letting me go on that journey, is I feel like it's the same way for you, right? Those are all people that were very well-meaning and they wanted the best for you, but
Yes.
you knew in your gut with your conversation with your wife, you guys knew like, no, this is the thing we need to do. And I think
Yes.
doing that and following that without like close friends and family on board can be really rough. So good for you, John.
Mm. Yeah, thank you. I mean, it was tough as well. And what it found is there's friends who stuck and family who stuck by us through this, and we still have great relationships 20 years after emigrating. And what I've also come to terms with is friends come and go in your lives. I used to, probably like you as well growing up, is like you have a friend and that you that's a friendship for life. And yeah, in school's slightly different because it's just that they are casual relationships. But once you graduate into careers, you feel as though the relationships are more important. And over time, looking back, you see friends come and go in your life, and you often think back, did I do something wrong? Why we just drifted apart, and why we didn't spend as much time together? And the more and more I speak to other people about this as well, it's like, oh no, we do this as well. And they felt bad, but then you realize that there are just transient relationships. There are a point in time in your life for days, weeks, years, decades sometimes, and then sometimes they stay, sometimes they go. And being comfortable with that has helped us a lot as well. Just knowing that at the end of the day, it's not about you. You haven't done anything wrong, make sure you haven't done anything wrong. But unless you have done something wrong, yeah, relationships come and go.
Yeah, they do.
And that
They do. I mean,
yeah.
and obviously in our world too, even things like marriages come and go, a lot more than they used to. But
Yeah.
that's yeah. I one of the hardest things I think for the men that I coach going through these transitions is that they have a really hard time just accepting it and just riding the wave, because it's really hard, especially if it's something you didn't want. Yeah, I mean, no one gets I don't think anyone gets married just to get divorced, right? Like no one goes into their wedding day being like, I can't wait till I get divorced. But
No,
it happens.
it's yeah.
It happens.
Yeah.
No one starts a business thinking like, oh yeah, in 2 years it's gonna fail. But it happens all the time, right? So
Yeah.
and through those transitions, relationships change. And
Yeah.
that's okay.
And
I've just found that the more I can just accept the fact that relationships are changing, the more I can try to stay present of who's surrounding me right now and why. Like how can I bring my best self? God, how can I bring your best self? How can I bring my best self into this situation? And man,
yes.
that is hard to do when you're in a really stressful thing like your business failing or going through a divorce, etc. Like you just can't do it. And I just want to be that help to people because I just didn't have that when I went through that stuff.
Yeah. And you touch on a really good point around the definition of failure as well, because sometimes people expect failure to be that catastrophic, big event, when in reality, sometimes the failure is you're just not growing, you're not progressing. It's just leveling out. And I found
Yeah.
this a lot with business as well as relationships. Is if the relationship isn't contributing to each other, or the business isn't contributing to yourself, your team, and your customers, that's you don't want to suffer this slow failure over time, because then you just stagnate, and then you look back, and to your point, then you've got the regrets because you didn't do something about it sooner. So I'm just curious what you've seen around almost the trigger points, or the decisions you make to say, okay, something's not right, and okay, right, I need to take action. Is there ways people can say, okay, questions they can ask themselves around that?
That's a good question. Before I get there, I just looked up because I wanted to read it to you, the definition of failure, because we went.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So if the second definition of failure, because the first just says lack of success, which is not helpful. The second definition of failure says this: failure is the omission of expected or required action.
Oh yeah. Okay. I like that. Yeah.
So all failure is I didn't do what was expected or required. Make sense?
Yeah. Yep.
I think what most people think of when they think
Because
failure
then,
is like, I'm a shameful, terrible, evil person, and why would anyone ever love me? Like, it's that extreme. But when you
yes,
go
I've
through a
done something
failure,
wrong or bad.
right, but it doesn't mean you're a failure. It just the only thing failure means is that I didn't do what was expected or what was required. That happens all the time. I mean, every single day of my life.
Yeah. I
So
was going to say, I did.
it's interesting to me that people are so afraid of admitting their failures, because by that definition, everyone watching this has failed while they've been watching this. I mean, that's how often we fail at something, right?
Yeah,
Like I just
yeah,
sat
because
wrong
your
on my chair or something. I
expectations,
mean,
yeah, and
it doesn't have to be extreme. So I wanted to come back
mm,
to your original question, and I
and I think
forgot
the
it
way
already. Go ahead.
well, no, because you kind of you're helping me answer it as well because I talked around expectations around the business or relationship where they just drift. It's so if the business or relationship is not growing, you're not contributing. There's almost that slow, painful failure, or not even just painful, just slow failure over time, which then results in regrets because you didn't do something. And your definition of failure there actually helped me take an answer from that, which is what are your expectations for the relationship or the business? Because if you're not achieving those, that's when you need to take action to remediate that, to fix it, to do something differently. And so if you're not meeting your expectations, so the point there is being clear on your expectations. And if you're not achieving them, what can I do to fix that? Which might be support groups like the coaching with Dan Martell or the Derelict and other support networks like that.
Yeah, for
But
sure.
it's
And the very first thing is just going back to your question of like, what do you do? Well, the very first thing is just awareness.
mm,
The second thing would be admittance, right? So first it's just
yeah,
awareing that there's something going on. And again,
mm,
use the word problem or failure or something that's off. It doesn't matter. Don't let the word discourage you. It just means something's
right,
off.
yeah, yeah,
It just means something's
and
going,
also,
again, back to the definition of failure. It just means that something is going not as expected or required. So if there's
mm,
something in your life that's not going expected or required, that's the first step of awareness. Oh, this is not going the way
mm,
that I want it to go. And then maybe
yeah,
thinking about, okay, well, have I been trying to change it? Right. So obviously, an easy example would be losing weight. Let's say
mm,
somebody's fat and they eat a bunch of bad foods for them. And they keep telling themselves, like, well, I'm gonna lose weight and I'm gonna get better and I want a six pack or whatever they say to themselves, right? Um, as they're doing those things, if their entire focus is on what they're doing wrong, which is usually what it is, like, "Oh, you fatty, you're just eating all this food and you can't just, control yourself," and, like, that's how we talk to each other, right?
mm, yeah,
If that's the whole focus, then that's gonna be their focus, and that's exactly what's gonna happen. Nothing is
mm,
gonna change whatsoever. So, that awareness is not calling ourselves something bad, right? That awareness is not like, "Oh, I'm a bad person now." The awareness, I think, actually does the opposite,
mm,
'cause what the awareness does is it realizes, like, that's not who I wanna be. That action is not my true self. So
yeah,
because that action is not my true self, I might need to admit some wrongdoing to some people. I might need to clean up some mess that I've made to some other people. And that I think that's the answer to your question. When somebody
yeah,
feels like something's just not going the way, then what I would say is the only thing you can control is what you're putting into that situation and your
mm,
attitude towards it, just like
yeah,
my attitude towards it. So if I go into that situation just saying, "Oh, well, that's stupid so and so because they're doing everything and I'm the victim, there's nothing that I can do about it." But if I go into that
mm,
situation thinking, "Wow, this isn't what I expected or what I really want required out of this situation. Why is that?" And the only thing I can control is what I'm doing. So I need to just look at myself and be like, "Well, what am I doing to
yeah,
make sure that this isn't working? And let me try to change that. Let me try to, amend to anybody that got hurt
mm,
during the process and then move forward with my life." And, John, this is not just for other
yeah,
people. That's just when I live my life that way, I have a very grateful, blessed life because it's really hard to be like angry and resentful and
yeah,
bitter at people.
yeah. And I go back to as you talk, it reminded me of a couple of things that I worked through with a hypnotherapist. I've recently gone through hypnotherapy to
Mm,
address some of my challenge around business growth, relationships, and how I approach things in life. And lot to unpack there. But one of the key questions he helped me with around the admittance when you're admitting something to yourself and then to other people in terms of relationship or failure is that you ask yourself the three questions with where is it good for me? Is it good for them or other people? And is it for the greater good? And you
Love
can
that.
define good, but generally speaking, if you have those three yeses, then you know it's a good thing. And I found that really powerful for me, because is it good for me? Is I wouldn't be doing it otherwise. Is it good for other people through business solving a problem, a relationship or whatever it is? And then is it for the greater good, as in you're not doing something that ultimately harms other people? And that was a technique I've been using recently to help me get to that admittance and then moving on stage with questions as well.
I love that.
So
I love
yeah,
that. Yeah.
it was really powerful actually. It was I was expecting something else going into a hypnotherapy. I don't know what your views on hypnotherapists are. I assumed it was the stage shows that they're going to make me do weird things, but it was not that at all.
Dance around
It was
like a
very,
monkey.
yeah, exactly. It was very therapeutic. We actually didn't do a huge amount of hypnotherapy itself. It was more therapy and then hypnosis added onto it at the end of each session. So that was really powerful. As someone who's poo-pooed that idea over time, in the last 2-3 years I've learned to be very powerful. I've tried to meditate more as well, to your point around the gratitude, being calm with yourself, and ultimately letting go with some people, because that's okay. So that's something we've not really unpacked. Is we talk about our failure in terms of perhaps we've not met expectations, but what about expectations where we expect of other people? Because sometimes we get frustrated because people aren't acting as we expect them to, which I have a view on this, but I'm just curious how you've seen that manifest with some of the conversations you've had.
Well, yeah, I can speak for my own life and the men that I coach, and it's the same in that when you hold on to a resentment, it doesn't help anyone.
Mm,
Doesn't help you, doesn't help the person you have the resentment towards, doesn't help anyone around you as you act out your resentment.
mm,
So I've just learned, and this is a constant progress and struggle for me. I'm not saying that I'm expert on this, just like I'm not saying I'm expert on anything I've talked about all day today. And that is that I've learned that I have to let things go. I have to be really
mm,
honest with myself about who am I angry at, who am I resentful towards, why, what happened. You're thinking about what did I add to that? Maybe I did something to have them respond in a certain
mm.
way, right? Etc. And then at the end of that, I just have to pray it out, and this is not a religious comment, like whether you want to pray to God or higher power or universe or
Mm.
some light in the sky, it doesn't matter. What I mean by pray it out is you got to just let it go. You got to get the
Take a
resentment out
moment.
of your
Yeah.
body. And
Mm,
you can do that through meditation as well. You can do it through meditation, through prayer, just through getting the toxicity out of your body, because when you resent someone, and I've resented plenty of people in my life. So again, I'm not the expert here. But when you resent someone, the only person it slowly poisons is yourself.
yes, it does. Yeah.
It doesn't help them at all. It actually just
Yeah.
hurts you.
Mm,
And
yeah.
this is
We
why. Go ahead, John.
I was going to say, because it did, building on that as well, we had some business investments over the last 3-4 years that have not come through. Put it that way. I'm avoiding the word fraud because that's a perception. To your point around the resentment, so it's a case of, yeah, we've invested hundreds of thousands into deals that haven't come through on their promises, and we've had to come to terms with letting it go, to say it is what
Mm.
it is. How do we do it differently next time? Definitely some things differently next time. But to the point around resentment or the anger toward them, we were and we are every now and again, but much less. It's, to your point, is around, we're not letting it go completely in terms of there's still potential for a return in an amicable way, but we're not getting frustrated or angry at them around how it's not fulfilled its promises, because we can't control that situation at all.
Yeah, there I'm not gonna be able to have this quoted, but a proverb that says something to the effect, an ancient proverb that says something to the effect of, when you're nice to someone who's mean or a fool to you, it's like dumping burning coals on their head. It's this really
Mm,
extreme analogy talking about basically how to have compassion and love for people that don't treat you well. And
mm,
when I found that I hold resentment towards people, it just, again, hurts me, just adds toxicity to my body, feels like I'm
yeah.
being poisoned. And
Mm,
when I can forgive them and have compassion towards them and then move on, it just sends out a different energy. And
yep.
oftentimes, if the person's a really evil person, which this has happened in my life, it just frustrates them even more because they don't
Right.
understand
Yes.
why you would respond with love with all the evil things that they're doing to you. But, I guess my
Yeah.
question
Yeah. Because they
to
almost want the reaction.
yeah, yeah, and I guess my question to you, John, and the entire audience is, which life do you wanna live? Like, do you wanna live the one where
Mm,
you're just bitter and resentful and angry? Because trust me, I've done that. I've done it with plenty of people, plenty of relationships, plenty of people that I feel like hurt me over the years. I've done that plenty of times, and it's just a
mm.
miserable way to live. It just
Yeah.
is.
Oh, it is. I mean, short term, if nothing else, you have sleepless nights. You're not focused on. You're not in the moment. You're distracted, and it can affect your health as well. And there is an element of why would I let them get away with that? Because I feel angry. So my anger is justifying my them not getting away with it. But to your point, it's if you truly can't control that and you can't influence the outcome, it's you have to move on, and it's easy to say, tough to do, but it once you go through it, you realize that it's the only way forward, because then you can learn from it and do something differently going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And,
Yeah.
on that note, I'll mention something as well because we keep kind of coming back to all these transitions that people go through and like the difficulty
Mm,
of doing that and everything else. So I'm going to mention one more time. I work with a lot of guys going through divorce. So if your
mm,
audience, if any of you guys are going through divorce, you just recently went through one, or you're considering going through one, reach out. If you're
yes,
cool putting my Instagram in the show notes, maybe later,
I am. Yep,
that'd be great.
absolutely.
So it's at the Derelict Podcast on Instagram. So the Derelict Podcast. And if you send me the message ebook, and then let's do LTA. So let's talk about, right, the podcast. So if you send
Yep,
me ebook LTA on
yep.
Instagram, I will send you a free ebook that I wrote for men in that situation. It's called The 5 Traps Men Face Going Through Divorce and How to Triumph Over Them. And it
Mm,
was what ended up happening is that I went out and I had my own research since I've been through a divorce and a lot of other friends as well. And I went out to a couple dozen people and just surveyed everybody and said, hey, what are the biggest mistakes that you made going through your divorce? And so maybe
mm,
surprising, maybe not. They were pretty much all the same across the
right.
board. They're a little
Yeah.
tweaked, a little different. So I put that into the 5 traps because they're the same ones that I faced. And it's a very practical guide. I mean, for anyone that's going through it, it's going to save you a bunch of money. You're going to get more time with your kids. You're going to make sure you
Yeah.
don't make huge mistakes like I did going through it. And then if you want some additional coaching, we can help. But I just wanted to offer it to your viewers today just because I think it's a really big resource. So if they just send me ebook LTA on Instagram at the Derelict Podcast, I will send that off to you. Or you can go buy it on Amazon. Feel free to do that as well.
Yeah, but that's awesome. I love that, because no one people haven't gone through a divorce until they go through a divorce. So when that moment happens, they any man is going to say, "What do I do? Where do I turn to? What do I do next?" And sure, you can ask your friends, and absolutely, but for someone like you who's been through it, where you're pulling the knowledge from other people as well into an ebook, I think that's a great resource. That's going
And
to help
just,
a lot of people.
as a quick side note, like if a divorce is contentious, then people generally turn to attorneys, and attorneys are not the
Mm,
only person that you need on the team. So just having an
right.
attorney and going to them for all of the advice and everything else is going to cost you a lot of money and not get you the results you want. I promise you that. So that's
Yeah.
one of the things that we talk about in the book because we're just trying to make sure that guys can get through this. And then more importantly, like we've talked about in the past, this is where coaching comes in. Okay, now how
Mm.
do we get you to 2.0? Like when I was going through my divorce, I couldn't even think about getting through it, let alone coming out the other side as a better human being. That was just the
Right.
furthest thing through my head. I thought I just didn't even know if I
Mm.
could get through the divorce. That's how traumatic it was for me.
Mm. Yeah.
But I really wish that I would have had a coach kind of helping me along the way, focusing on my 2.0. Because if I had been
Yeah.
focusing on that, man, that process would have been just a lot more healing, I think, a lot better
Yes.
for that. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think that's a really important point as well. I mean, going back to those business deals that didn't go well for us, the lawyers and attorneys absolutely critical in terms of, and a very important role to play in the process of going through recovery. But they're 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 very good at that lane, and they're not the only lane. It's weird how society, I don't know about you, but growing up, you think lawyers are going to solve everything because it's all about truth and righteousness and justice. And I can't remember the movie or maybe it was an episode of a series one day. They said it's lawyers are about, it's not about truth or right and wrong. It's about proving a point. And that can be very important in a case, in a proceeding, in a divorce or whatever. But it's not the only thing. To your point, you need that other guidance, mentorship, support group to get you through that journey as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
This has been really good. This has been deep. I
Thanks,
love
John.
the
I've
journey we
liked it
went
too.
through. It really sparked. I've still got my brain firing around other thoughts as well. And to that point, if people wanted to reach out to you, you mentioned the Instagram and the book. Is there any other ways to get hold of you?
That's the best way. Just hit me up on
Mm.
Instagram. We're on all the socials. You can go to the website, thederelict.biz as well. But hit me up on Instagram. That's the best place. And
Mm.
if the ebook doesn't apply to you and you're
Mm.
not, a divorced man or guy going through divorce, that sort of thing, but you want to talk about any of these aspects or like how we do coaching, etc., then just send me the same thing. Go to the
Mm.
Derelict Podcast Instagram and send me the word coach. And again, do
Mhm.
LTA because then I'll know it's from this
Yeah.
show. So just send me
The
coach
Let's Talk About.
LTA. And currently, the other offer I'll give to your audience is that I'll give you a free 30-minute coaching call. It's valued at
Mm.
$250 for anybody
Awesome.
that does that. We can talk about whatever
Okay.
you want. There's no strings attached to it. You don't have to sign up for anything. It's literally just that 30-minute call. Just because I'm in a good mood right now. So how about that? So if you send me a message on Instagram, the Derelict Podcast, again, just write the word coach LTA, and I'm happy to reach out to you that way as well.
Awesome. That's very generous, Josh. I really love that as well. And as I think back about what we've talked about as well, the a couple of things I'm going to take away is definitely around the admittance. I love that. I love admitting the failure, or at least reconciling it with yourself to then take steps going forward. And also that definition of failure as well. I must have looked up many definitions of failure, and it's always from the innovation, technology, business, entrepreneur space. But I love what you came up with there around just not meeting the expectations. Okay, cool. I can work with that. What are the expectations? So that's great. Is there anything you wanted to, any messages, any key things you wanted to leave our listeners with as we wrap up?
I think just one thought just spawned based on what you just said, and that is if I've learned anything about relationships, I've had a lot of successful relationships, a lot of failed relationships. And I think if I've learned of
Mm.
anything about any of them, it's that at a certain point in any relationship, one of you and then the other one will fail because we're human,
Mm.
right? We always fail at
Yeah.
something. We will do something that's different than what's expected or what's required in a certain action, right? Hence failure. And I think if I've learned anything about relationships, the ones that last, whether they're romantic or just friendships, are the ones that admit those failures when they happen and admit how it probably hurt the other person and then try to move past it. And every
Mm.
single relationship that I've seen that's failed has had at least one person, maybe both, but at least one person that's just unwilling to do that. They're unwilling to look at their own failures,
Yeah.
their own mistakes, their own things. And they just want to blame it on the other person. And therefore, the relationship eventually has to
Yeah.
fail. So
Yeah.
I think
I
if there's
I
anything
agree.
like, yeah, like the last thing I would probably say is just I would encourage everybody listening to this. And by the way, I'm encouraging myself too, because there's plenty of times I don't do this. I'm encouraging all of us just to spend some time today, just to think about, like, is there anything that I need to clean up on my side of the street in any sort of
Mm,
relationships?
yeah.
Is there something I said that's just not sitting
Yeah.
right with me? Is there something where I just need to tone down my ego for a second and just admit that I did something wrong, even though I don't want to admit it? Right? Is there something, is there a friend that comes to your mind when you're thinking this of like, well, I don't need to, if you're thinking in your head right now, well, I don't need to apologize to him because that's who you need to apologize to. Just say it.
Yes.
Or
Yeah.
that's who you need to go admit
Exactly.
some wrongdoing to. It's the person you don't want to
Yeah.
do it because that's the person you need to do it. So I think
Yeah.
that's it.
And that's
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 yeah, that's
very
my
bad. I
encouragement
agree
today.
totally.
Yeah.
It's those little things that if you let the little things slide or fester or just ignore them, it sets a tone which isn't good. You need to make sure it's addressed. It's facing it head on. Back to your point around accountability. It's just being accountable as a good person to yourself and everyone around you as well. Love it. Awesome. Well, thanks again. Thanks, Josh. This is awesome podcast. Love the content. Love the depth we got into. Lots to think about, and we know how to reach out to you. So yeah, I'm sure some of the listeners will be reaching out to you soon. So
Well, I
thanks
really
again, and have
appreciate
a
you
great
having me
day.
on. I really appreciate you having me on, John. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Let's Talk About It podcast, brought to you by WeDeliverYourVision.com, the go-to place for delivering your vision and getting traction fast.